The coalition has achieved its biggest lead in the poll since the last election, pulling ahead of Labor in the latest Freshwater Strategy poll. The Australian Financial Review reports the coalition now leads Labor 52 to 48%. That represents a 4.1% swing away from Labor since the 2022 election. And it could mark a turning point for the coalition as the party also holds double-digit leads over Labor on key issues including cost of living, economic management and crime. On their current trajectory, it's possible that the coalition could form a majority government. But Labor still has some good news. Anthony Albanese is ahead of Peter Dutton as preferred Prime Minister, 45 to 43%. Let's bring in the Deputy Executive Director at the Institute of Public Affairs, Dan Wild. Now, Dan, the coalition is close, but if the election result mirrored that poll, well, they wouldn't get a majority. We're going to look at a Labor minority government.
Well, that's right, but I think you'd rather be in the coalition camp than the Labor camp at the moment. People have sort of made up their minds about Labor, that Labor doesn't deserve a second term because they haven't delivered for Australians. All they did is spend $500 million in half their first term in Parliament on a voice to Parliament to divide us by race, which was rejected by 60% of Australians and also a significant share of Labor voters, and things have only gotten worse since then. And I think that Australians are also looking at Peter Dutton because he supports Australia Day. He's been very strong on the Australian flag and other key cultural issues, and they see somebody who is going to stand up for Australian values. So, I think things are only going to get worse for Labor. Anthony Albanese historically has not been a strong campaigner. We saw that in 2022 when Labor actually did the best in the campaign when they said that Anthony Albanese had COVID. And they took him off the campaign trail. Now, maybe he had COVID.
I remember that.
I don't know. But he was lying in bed and, the polls were going up for Labor when he was lying in bed. So, not a great campaigner.
No, I do remember that now. I don't know what excuse they can use this time. Perhaps he'll be busy planning his wedding or maybe a bout of influenza. We'll wait and see. But the Prime Minister did make time in his very busy schedule last week to sit down with extreme left hysteric Abby Chatfield for a lengthy interview. This wasn't some 5-minute phone-in chat. It went on for about 90 minutes. And Chatfield is Dan, so intolerant that she has boasted about unfollowing friends who hold any sort of gathering or party on Australia Day, even if they call it Invasion Day. So this is the sort of character we're talking about. She's also banned pro-Israel people from her platform while hosting those who promote all sorts of ugly lies and hate towards the only Jewish state. Why is the Prime Minister cozying up to a character like this?
Well, he wanted a softball interview, that sort of shows him in some kind of normal setting would be the thinking. I mean, I think I didn't watch all of the 90 minutes. It was just, I don't know anyone who can get through that, to be honest. But the parts I did watch were obviously scripted. It wasn't sort of this freewheeling, interview like Trump had with Joe Rogan, for example, or JD Vance for that matter, where there was no scripting. You could tell that Albanese had the questions in advance. It just kind of shows also the kind of people he hangs out with, people that don't like Australia, that don't support Australia Day. This is a long-running theme of this Prime Minister and this government. So, look, it's hardly surprising that he's talking to these sort of pseudo celebrities on social media who don't really speak to the mainstream. Again, Anthony Albanese only ever speaks to the activist class. He's never spoken to mainstream Australians because he doesn't understand mainstream Australian values.
But he tells us he's governing for the mainstream, because I remember in the election campaign last time around, even when he got elected, we kept hearing that he's not some woke far-left ideologue. Remember that famous front page, "I'm not woke," telling everybody, no, I'm all about mainstream Australian values. And then he thrusts the voice upon us. And now this. He is cozying up to people who are very far from mainstream Australian values. Now, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton has pledged to splurge even more than Labor on Medicare. Labor announced a $8.5 billion Medicare funding package yesterday. Peter Dutton has immediately returned fire. He's pledging $9 billion. And neither policy, Dan, appears to be fully costed. And I do wonder if this does undermine the Coalition's pledge to be fiscally responsible, to be different from Labor. How can we expect them not to blow up the budget if they're spending billions like this willy-nilly?
Yeah, I think Peter Dutton recently has said that the cutting of public servants would save about $6 billion a year, and that presumably would help pay for this commitment. So we'll see if that transpires in terms of the cutting of 30-odd thousand, bureaucratic pen pushers in Canberra, which is a very good idea. In terms of the broader issue here, obviously Anthony Albanese is trying to do Medicare 2.0. Which worked in 2016 in a political sense for two reasons. One is that it was sort of believable to a lot of people that Malcolm Turnbull would privatise and sell off Medicare, which wasn't a fair claim, but a lot of people believed it. And secondly, it wasn't actually rebutted by Malcolm Turnbull or the Liberals at the time. So obviously Peter Dutton's not going to let that happen again. And I think it also shows how desperate Labor is. Elections are about two things. What have you done for me lately, and what are you going to do for me next? If Labor is reaching into the bottom drawer to pull out another scare campaign about Medicare, and that's all they've got, then I think they're toast.